ladies. Yoga Yukta, engaged in devotional service. Visuddha Atma, a purified soul. Vijita Atma, self-controlled. Jita Indriya, having conquered the senses. Sarvabhuta, to all living entities. Atma Bhuta Atma, compassionate. Korvan Api, though engaged in work. Na, never. Limpyate, is entangled. Krishna is describing the qualities of a purified soul. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. Please repeat. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. We'll read part of the purport, quite long. One who is on the path of liberation by Krishna consciousness is very dear to every living being, and every living being is dear to him. This is due to his Krishna consciousness. Such a person cannot think of any living being as separate from Krishna, just as the leaves and branches of a tree are not separate from the tree. He knows very well that by pouring root on the root of the tree, the water will be distributed to all the leaves and branches. And by supplying food to the stomach, the energy is automatically distributed throughout the body. Because one who works in Krishna consciousness is servant to all, therefore he is very dear to everyone. And because everyone is satisfied by his work, he is pure in consciousness. Because he is pure in consciousness, his mind is completely controlled, and because his mind is completely controlled, his senses are also controlled. Because his mind is always fixed on Krishna, there is no chance of his being deviated from Krishna, nor is there a chance that he will engage in senses and matters other than the service of the Lord. He does not like to hear anything except topics relating to Krishna. He does not like to eat anything which is not offered to Krishna, and he does not like to wish to go anywhere if Krishna is not involved. Therefore, his senses are controlled. A man of controlled senses cannot be offensive to anyone. One may ask, why then was Arjuna offensive in the battlefield towards others? Wasn't he in Krishna consciousness? Arjuna was only superficially offensive because, as he has already been explained in the second chapter, all the assembled persons on the battlefield would continue to live individually as souls cannot be slain. So spiritually, no one was killed on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Only their dresses were changed by the order of Krishna, who was personally present. Therefore, Arjuna, while fighting on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, was not really fighting at all, He was simply carrying out the orders of Krishna in full Krishna consciousness. Such a person is never entangled by the reactions of work. Umagyantimirandasya Gyanajana Salakaya Chaksun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimakti Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvasesa Sunyavadi Pastyatya Desatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaho Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasati Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Krishna is describing some, not all, but some of the principal qualities of a purified soul. He's active, he's always working, but in the material world, when people work, they get caught up in the work and they get controlled by the work that they perform. Whatever they do connects them to a particular mode of material nature, and that mode entangles them in the reactions of work. But one who works in devotion, who work under the guidance of the Supreme Lord, is never entangled by the activities of devotional service, because the activities of devotional service are on the spiritual platform. Therefore, there is no entanglement. And therefore, one can perform any activities, but they only perform activities for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and for propagating, proliferating the science of Krishna consciousness to others in the world. This is their focus, to please the Lord and to bring more souls into the fold of Krishna's consciousness activities. In 1973, March 25th, 1973, I walked into New Vrindavan and I said goodbye to the material world. At least I tried to. Of course, when I was there, I met many wonderful persons who were there. I had no idea what was Krishna conscious in terms of practice, although I had read a few books. The date was very significant, March 25th, 1973, because 2 years earlier, on March 25th, 1971, His Holiness Radhanath Swami met Srila Prabhupada for the first time. So already I had some connection with this great soul. And we had three farms. There was a brahmachari farm, which at the time when I came was a brahmacharini farm. My sister, she's here, she lived in that farm for some time. And only about, I think about a year later, it became a brahmachari farm. And during that time, which was separate from the main farm was 2 miles in distance from the brahmachari farm. And to get to the brahmachari farm, you had to go through the woods, over creeks, up hills, through the forest. It was 2 miles. And it was a nice seclusion away from what we say, the activities of everything. It was a little place that we had, and all we had was brahmacharis there. At that time, the community leader, Kirtananda Swami, wanted to glorify Srila Prabhupada in a very big way. So we had started to bring about Prabhupada's vision for New Vrindavan was to have 7 temples, replicas of the actual Goswami's temples. And we started with the Govindji temple up on a hill, high up on a hill. We spent many, many weeks digging a 15-foot hole, which was 15 feet deep and about 12 feet wide, and placed an Antasasya ready to begin the construction. But then Kirtananda Swami thought, how can we honor the Supreme Lord without honoring his pure devotee? So then everything switched. We have to build a house for Prabhupada. And so all of the energy, the focus, the resources, whatever we had, which wasn't much at the time, was now focused on building this house for Prabhupada. And as we were starting to plan, it became more and more not a house, but a palace. The idea was that Prabhupada shouldn't be given just an ordinary house. He's a king and he should live in the palace. He's the king of all spiritual persons in the world. He is Prabhupada, who is one who is actually the person who all Prabhus honor. So there is Prabhu, which means master, but the master of the masters is known as Prabhupada. So everything was shifted there. So I, being a brahmachari, was given the service of living and also serving at the brahmachari ashram. And we had to build a palace. We had about 25 to 30 dedicated brahmacharis. And to get to the palace from the brahmachari ashram, Hare Krishna, was to go down a deep, deep gorge hill. It's like almost straight down. You had to go all the way down, and there was a lake and a waterfalls. You'd cross around that, and then you come up the other side, and you walk almost straight up to the top of the hill on the other side, which took about at least an hour minimum. And on the other side was the site where Prabhupada's palace was. So all of the brahmacharis would go after breakfast every day and begin their service building Srila Prabhupada's palace, except for 3 people. Radhanath Swami, who was the pujari, we had deities, Radha Vrindavan. I was the cook. I was the head cook because I was the only cook. It was easy to manage all of the other cooks because it was just me. And then there was the woodcutter because everything was cooked on wood. We didn't cook in, Srila Prabhupada used to say, first class cooking, cow dung. Second class, wood. Third class, gas. Fourth class, you know what that is. People get sick just by cooking. That's electrical stoves. They're actually dangerous for your health, actually. And so the 3 of us were maintaining the ashram, taking care of the deities. And then I started to associate with this very special personality his mood was complete devotion to serving the deities. He would go to sleep and he did all of the deity worship. We had Radha Vrindavan, we had Gaur-Nitai deities, we had Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra. And he would do all of the pujas for 6 offerings every day and 6 artis. And he would also put the deities to rest that night. He was the only one doing everything. Of course, in the morning, sometimes someone would help out a little bit, but then they would have to leave and go and help build Prabhupada's palace. So Maharaj would go to sleep usually around, like 10:20, 10:40. I remember it was around that time. And when he would get up at 1 o'clock in the morning. So he would sleep about 3 hours, maybe a little bit more. He would chant all his rounds, and then he would take care of the deities throughout the day, because if you didn't chant your rounds at that time, there was no time. There was no time to chant your rounds throughout the day, because there was always service to do, especially for the deities. I was in the kitchen, and that's another story anyway. But we would observe Maharaj, all of us, we would think, wow, he's so austere. He would sleep on the floor with just a little blanket all year round. Wintertime, summertime, whatever the weather was, on this floor behind the deities. That way, when he would get up and we go bathe, bathing was in New Vrindavan was interesting, because we had a little bathhouse that we created, which was part of the temple was above. And then the bathhouse, you would go out the door and you go around the corner and come in through another entrance. And there, as soon as you walk in, was the kitchen on the side. And then you go a little bit farther, there was the bathhouse. The bathhouse was a big, big 55-gallon bucket. I can't call it a bucket, but it was a gigantic bucket, 55 gallons, with a hose coming down. And the water would come through the hose into the bucket, and we'd have these, what do you call it, milk containers, and we'd cut the top off, and you'd scoop it up and you'd throw it. And there was no hot water. It was cold. And in the brahmachari ashram, water was underground. So there was an underground stream that would feed the water. So in the wintertime, it was blistering cold. Narana Swami used to take 6 baths a day, because each time he would do the deities, he would have to bathe to do the next arti. And he would do 6 baths a day. And of course, there was no bathroom. We didn't have anything in the way of a bathroom, because we were living in the woods. There was no question of bathrooms. So when we asked, I remember we would ask, well, where do we, take care of nature? And they would point to the woods, and that was it. And that was all year round. And sometimes the ground was frozen solid. Hare Krishna. And they would give you a shovel and say, you're going to have to work a little. But so this was life in New Vrindavan. And I was amazed to see how dedicated Maharaj was. He stayed with the deities for many years, doing 6 artis a day, dressing the deities. We had, of course, I mentioned, we had Radha Vrindavan Nath. The brass deities, you can still see them on the altar of the big temple now in New Vrindavan. They're about this high. And we had Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra. And we also had Gaura. Of course, we had a deity of Srila Prabhupada in the temple. And everything was heated by wood. We had no other source of heat. So the wood would be cut and brought in, and if it was wet, we'd have to dry it out, and that means the whole place would be smoky. So I remember Kirtananda Swami, he had heard from Mayapur that Srila Prabhupada had asked Jananivas, the 2 miraculous twin brothers, Jananivas and Pankajrangi, he asked Jananivas, you stay with Radha Madhava your whole life. You serve Radha Madhava your whole life. In other words, Mayapur is your home. So Kirtananda liked that idea, and he told Radhanath Swami the same thing. You stay with Radha Vrindavan Nath your whole life. And that means you don't leave that little farm, which was there was nothing. I remember I didn't see any money. We didn't have any television. We had no phones. We had no radios. We had little tape recorders. That way we could tape some of the classes, and that was the only electronic device we had. It was a broken down tape recorder, and we had, we had some living entities that were of the lower levels. They were called cockroaches, and they would get into the tape recorders, and then the tape recorders wouldn't work. So this was life in New Vrindavan. And I remember, just to fast forward a little bit, many years later, after we had left it and Radhanath Maharaj was traveling, he stayed there for 2.5 years without leaving. I stayed there for about 3 months without leaving, because during the Sunday feast, which was at the other farm, you would leave there if you had the opportunity and go to the main farm and take part in the Sunday feast and then come back. So that was optional, because I could sometimes cook the Sunday feast ahead of time and then go down and come back and just. But Radhanath Swami could never leave. He stayed with the deities, and he loved it. It was like, one time he said to me, I remember, we were in Italy, and he said, we were sitting together, and it was during John Janmashtami, we were watching a play. He looked at me and said, did you ever think we'd have credit cards traveling all the world and airplanes when we were sitting in that old farmhouse back in the early days? I said, no. Inconceivable. We thought this would be our life. We would just was it. And we liked it. It was just it was so peaceful. And all we did was have devotional service. And of course, the devotees would work all day in the palace. They'd come back at night. And we'd have an evening program and then morning program. So the kirtans were really wonderful. And prasadam was, well, that's another thing. But because I was the cook, that's another story. But one time, after many years, we did a reunion at New Vrindavan. All of the devotees had come. And so Maharaj, Radhanath Swami, was talking. And at one point, he starts to speak. He said, I was in the old Vrindavan farm, and I saw, in 2.5 years, I saw only 4 women. Hare Krishna. And then he named the 4. Radharani, Subhadra, Tulsi, and cow. That was it. And I tried to be up there, I tried to emulate him, but I couldn't do it. I was up there for 3 months at a stretch, but that was it. And I remember after being there for 3 months, the first lady I saw, I said, wow, that's what they look like. Oh, okay. It was like we haven't saw the opposite sex in so many months. It was like, whoa. So yeah, it was just, it was very wonderful to be in that atmosphere. All we had is our devotional service. And Maharaj was such a pillar of inspiration for the rest of us. And he was teaching us, basically, that to accept this type of lifestyle and to surrender to Krishna in devotional service is the perfection of life. And he exemplified that not only in his personal way of acting, but in his preaching also. He was so austere, his austerity. And austerity is important, because in devotional service, it's explained that knowledge leads to austerity, and austerity leads to bhakti. So without performing austerities, really bhakti doesn't really develop fully. What are those austerities? Of course, Krishna mentions the austerities in the Bhagavad Gita. Austerities of the mind, austerities of the body, austerities of speech. But then, New Vrindavan the way we lived compared to what we were accustomed to before we came to that was constant austerities. We had no hot water all year round. And some of the devotees couldn't take it. There was one devotee, his name was Tejo Maya. He's still there. It's amazing. We would line up to take a bath, and we would all be standing in line with our gumshoes, and one after another, they would, because you only had one person at a time could bathe. We all had to go to Mangalarti. So you had to be fast because you were holding up the rest of the devotees. But when he would get up there, he would pick up the bucket and then he put a few drops on his leg and he started, oh, Krishna, ouch, 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 ouch. Oh, Krishna, 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 help, help, help. And he would just do that, and he would start praying to Krishna and calling to, and we would say, "Come on, Tej, you'll get done." He would make us late for Arati all the time. It was like, I mean, the water was pinching cold. I mean, it was stinging cold. But we did it because that's what we had. There was no choice. I mean, there was a kind of a forced austerity. And speaking about bathing, since we're on that topic, we had no soap. There was no soap because we had no money. Whatever, when someone would come and join, we'd say, "Do you have any money?" I remember when I first came to New Vrindavan, I was in New York, and I met Koladri. He was in New York shopping for the deities in New York, and that was my first encounter with a New Vrindavan devotee, and I actually wanted to go. So I was with who's now known as Devamrit Swami. We were friends in New York, and he said, I said, you know, this New York, this city life, I want to go something where it's more peaceful to execute, you know, Krishna consciousness. He said, well, there's a farm called West Virginia, and just happens to be there's the temple president. Why don't you ask him if you can come? So I went over and introduced myself. I tried to be really polite, and I said, well, you know, I heard you have a nice farm and people come. Can I come? He said, yeah. I said, what do I have to do? He said, just bring your money. So New Vrindavan didn't have any money in those days. And we usually, when I first got there, we only had one, everybody had one dhoti. We would wash the dhoti at night and then wear it the next day. And sometimes it wasn't dry, especially in the wintertime. So it was difficult. And what to speak about soap? So for years, when we were there was no soap. So one lady, she was the temple president's wife, Kaladri's wife. Her name was Kutila. She decided, I'm going to make soap for the devotees. Then they're going to have soap. We were using wood ashes. When we would burn the wood for heating, for cooking, or for heating the stoves, we would collect the ashes and we would use it as an abrasive to wash. And the devotees, dhotis, which were white, some of them were gray. We had another ashram. It was the gray ashram. Because wood ashes. So we were using wood ashes for washing, and we'd put it on our face. The devotees would look a little different. But she thought, all right, I'm going to do something to serve the devotees. So she got this book, How to Make Soap. And she got the ingredients. And one of the ingredients was this caustic thing called lye. Lye is very caustic. It's more like you need it in order to make it as a binder for the soap. But it can if you use too much, it can be dangerous. If you use too little, the soap won't come out. So she made the soap, and then the next day, everyone thought, soap. We had these big, bright pink bars of soap. And then everybody got their bar. She made enough. But the day after, everybody stopped using it because she put too much lye in it, and all the devotees had these big red blotches all over their body, and they were suffering. So that was the end of the soap. Hare Krishna. Did you have that problem, Kunjari? You didn't. The ladies were saved from that. Anyway, so these were some of the what we say simple things that made up our life in New Vrindavan. But Radhanath Swami, for him, any of these austerities were natural, easy, and he seemed to welcome them. For us, it was like very arduous and difficult, and we had to somehow understand that we had to do this in order for us to stay and make and perform devotional service here. We loved New Vrindavan, but it was difficult. And everybody, we all had the same footwear, big rubber boots that come up to your knee, because the place most of the year, even in the summertime, was filled with mud. And sometimes when using these boots, the boots would get holes in it. They get old. And to get a new pair, you had to fill out a requisition, and then somebody would go shopping once a month in Pittsburgh, which was about an hour and a half away, and buy some boots if we had the money. So when you get a hole in it, and then when it was rainy or muddy, it would all get inside, and your feet were wet. So we were walking around with wet feet. But devotees somehow or other were able to get plastic bags. So we would put plastic bags on our feet. And then somehow we escaped the mud and the water, but it was difficult. So this was life in New Vrindavan. But Radhanath Swami, he was the model for us because we needed someone to inspire us to continue in our austerities. And he was always encouraging us. When it came to prasadam, Maharaj was very austere when he would eat prasadam. He would take very, very little, and a lot of times he would just avoid eating very opulent foods. Most of the time he did. He ate very simple. And he was also teaching us because everyone would look forward to the Sunday feast. That was it. The day of the week, favorite day. On Monday, we would count the days until Sunday, the next Sunday, because then we would get, halva and pakora and sweet rice and what is that? Can't remember what it's called. Malpura. Oh, wow. And all of these really nice sweets, pushpan rice and breadsticks. But the rest of the week, it was like oats and water and rice. And I used to cook, and we were getting supplies of oats from these food kitchens because we were a nonprofit organization. We could plug in and get this boga from these food kitchens, and they would give it to us free. And we get a lot of oats and peanuts. And I would have to cook for the devotees. Devotees' breakfast was just toasted oats with peanuts and milk. We have plenty of milk. That was the opulence because we had cows. And so I had this stove, big stove, which was a wood stove, had a large surface. And I had this frying pan, and it was big. The pan was about this big around with a long handle, and it had bumps in it. It wasn't smooth. Hare Krishna. So I would have to cook the oats and make them toasted. But because it wasn't a smooth surface, it gets stuck easy. And then sometimes the oats burn. So devotees would think, oh, there's raisins in it. No, I said, no, it's not raisins. Because they were always looking for something. And then the program was to put peanuts in it for the devotees to make the oats a little bit. And it was just dry oats, that's all. Just dry oats. And so we had peanuts, and I would roast the peanuts in. But I had this idea that brahmacharis and protein should be not so much, they don't go together so much. Because protein means too much energy, and that means increase in sex desire. So I was thinking to keep the brahmacharis from increasing in their extra energy, I ration the peanuts to 8 peanuts per devotee. So I would count the devotees and put 8 peanuts times devotees. But then there was a revolution. They were going to overthrow me. But the reason they didn't, because there was no one else to cook. So they forced me to go up to 13 peanuts per person. That's what I did. I was in New York just this year with Radhanath Swami, and we were standing in front of Radha Govinda in New York. It was a kirtan program, and we were standing together right in front of the deities. And on the altar was Boga, and there was a box of oats. So Maharaj goes like this to me, oats. He was reminding me. And of course, I was also laughing. Because when he talks about me in New Vrindavan, he always tells, Chandra Mauli only gave 8 peanuts to the devotees. And he thought it was ridiculous. He never thought it was a good idea. And this was life in New Vrindavan. Of course, Maharaj was a cowherd boy. Later on, we went down to the main farm and he would milk the cows there. And so he was part of that. And they would bring me the milk. This was later, this was actually earlier when I first joined. They would bring me the milk and I would separate the milk. I would take the cream out of the milk, churn the cream and make butter and give the butter to the deities and give the milk for both the deities and the devotees. And Maharaj was milking, and he would bring me the milk and I would separate it. So he would always call me Mother Yasoda because I had the service of making butter. So I thought that was a compliment. So life in New Vrindavan was so simple, so austere. And Kirtananda Swami, he was always pushing us to build and to expand New Vrindavan because Prabhupada kept writing. He said, make Vrindavan, make New Vrindavan a place where people from all over the world can come because not everyone can come to Old Vrindavan. So make New Vrindavan like Old Vrindavan. Keep it simple. So keeping it simple means we had a cow barn, we had a few places for residents, which was usually just an ashram type of lifestyle. And that was it. I remember when we first joined, we were bathing outside all year round. And it was cold in New Vrindavan. In the wintertime, the snow would be so profuse that many of the farmers in the local area, they would lose their horses because the horses would get buried in the snow. The snow was so deep. And so it was ice cold, and we were bathing outside in the wintertime. And there was one brahmachari, she was living nearby, and she told me, she said, when the brahmacharis were bathing, all I could hear was these screams. And she said, I was thinking somebody's attacking us. And then she realized, no, it was the brahmacharis that were bathing. We're devotees, we're only brahmacharis. Most of us were brahmacharis at the time. We had this gat, and it was in the wintertime, there would be a sheet of ice on the top of it, and you had to smash the ice, then you dip your bucket in there, and you throw it over, and then you run as fast as you can back to the ashram. Fortunately, when I got there, that only lasted a few months. After that, they made an inside bathhouse, but still with no hot water. We never had hot water. Hot water was just an idea. But it was amazing how Radhanath Swami would have to preach to us. I remember one time when Srila Prabhupada came, we were all excited. And Prabhupada was he came to the main farm, that was called Bahulavan, which was 2 miles from the Brahmachari farm. Then we had Madhuvan. Madhuvan was the place where we had 4 or 5 Grihastha couples. They were living there. So we had 3 farms. And later on, there was Talavan. But Prabhupada came and we welcomed him at the main farm. And he was giving class every night. And at that time, I had to stay up and do the offerings. And Radhanath Swami had the privilege to go see Prabhupada and hear from Prabhupada. And Kirtananda Swami wanted to keep Prabhupada away from the Brahmachari ashram. He didn't want it to, he was thinking if Prabhupada sees this, he's going to think, what is this? Because you can't really describe it in words. We weren't, seeable, to use the word. And Kirtananda Swami wanted to keep Prabhupada away from there so he could just stay in. So, but Radhanath Swami wanted to bring Prabhupada up. So after a few nights of lectures, Radhanath Swami brought a picture of Radha Vrindavan Nath. And when Prabhupada was talking, he put it in front of Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada looked and he saw these deities. And he said to Kirtananda Swami, who are these deities? And then he was stuck. He couldn't lie to Prabhupada. He said, oh, that's Radha Vrindavan Nath. They're at the Brahmachari. Oh, we should go. So Maharaj got Prabhupada to come. So Prabhupada walked the whole 2 miles. Devotees were also accompanying Prabhupada on the walk. I had already been up there when Prabhupada was on his way up. And Prabhupada was walking so fast that all the devotees couldn't keep up with Prabhupada. And even everyone was running and Prabhupada was walking. Prabhupada wanted to get up there. And we had one cow up there. Her name was Kalia. Kalia was a beautiful black and white Jersey cow. And previous time when Prabhupada had visited New Vrindavan, he liked Kalia's milk. We gave him Kalia's milk. And so Prabhupada had a relationship with Kalia. He said, this milk is the best. It was so creamy and so tasty. So when Prabhupada came, when he got into the area of Old Vrindavan, before he actually came to the ashram, Kalia was there. And when Kalia saw Prabhupada, she ran. She bolted, running all the way to Prabhupada. When she got to Prabhupada, she stopped. And she turned around and she led Prabhupada to the ashram. Prabhupada had this special relationship with Kali. Prabhupada liked her milk. So when Prabhupada came, we were all excited. The brahmacharis were there. And so Prabhupada sat on the Vyasasana. It was time for Bhagavatam class. And Prabhupada gave a simple but very short class. And Prabhupada was like a little kid. we're hearing from Shrutikirti Prabhu how Prabhupada could be very childlike, not childish, but childlike, very innocent, almost like a child in the way he would behave. And so when he was up there, he loved it up there because it was like nothing. It reminded him of Vrindavan. So he loved it up there. So he was just feeling really at home up there. He was smiling and talking very openly to the devotees. And then, of course, his entourage came with him. So when Prabhupada finished, then his servant turned to Radhanath. He was Radhanath Brahmachari at the time. This was inside the temple. And he said, bring the cookies. Because Prabhupada always liked to distribute cookies to the kids. And the kids would always come up and Prabhupada would give them. Prabhupada would be smiling and the kids later on when they grew up, they would say, oh, when I was a kid, I got a cookie from Prabhupada. They were really happy. So, and then Radhanath Maharaj said, we don't have any cookies. But his servant said, bring the cookies. Prabhupada wants cookies. It was like that. So there was no cookies. So we had just finished making the offering on the altar, which I cooked. Hare Krishna. So Maharaj went on the altar and picked up the deity plate and came off the altar and started going towards Prabhupada with the deity plate. And he got there, and then his servant said, what's this? He said, we're going to give this to, he said, no, bring the cookies. You can't give that to Prabhupada. So there was a crowd right around Prabhupada because the class was over. Now Prabhupada was just talking to the devotees and asking them different questions. So Maharaj was on one side and he went around the other side and came up to the other side of Prabhupada, avoided the servant, and handed Prabhupada the plate. And Prabhupada's looking at it. It was a silver plate with silver bowls. We just had gotten some new silver bowls and plates for the deities. And there was gulab jamun, paratha, banana chutney, there was a sabji, there was a sweet, there's a few things on there. And so Prabhupada puts the plate on his lap and starts eating from it. And he's smiling and eating it. And then he picks up the gulab jamun. You know, Prabhupada's servant is fried. But Prabhupada's having a good time. He puts the gulab jamun in his mouth, and this was mystical. He bit it, and it just squirted, and it went on to devotees, and the devotees said, Jai. They got squirted by Prabhupada's gulab jamun juice. And then Prabhupada it was dripping down his face, and it went on to the Vyasasan, and it made these big gulab jamun stains in the Vyasasan. Later on, we thought, maybe we should wash. No, they said, no, these stains are, this is history. We have to keep these stains. So then, Prabhupada, after he finished everything and distributed at the same time, he started distributing the bowls to the devotees, the silver bowls of the deities. And he was giving them out. And the devotees were getting bowls from Prabhupada and thinking, wow. And then Radhanath Swami realized these are the deities' bowls, and now we're losing them, and the devotees are never going to give them back because they got it from Prabhupada. So then he made an announcement. I think he made the announcement. He said, devotees, please, these are the deities' silver bowls. Can you please return them to the altar? And all the devotees gave the bowls back. So it worked anyway. So that was a nice episode. And you can see a picture where Srila Prabhupada came on that day. He's taking darshan. That picture is quite famous. I think there's a picture of that here. Prabhupada's standing and looking at Radha Vrindavan Nath. You can't see Radhanath Swami because the picture doesn't include him, but he's just next to Prabhupada, a little bit distance away as Prabhupada's taking that darshan. So that was kind of historical. Prabhupada came and he just gave us his mercy in such a sweet way. It was really, the devotees were so enlivened. So being with Radhanath Swami there, we learned so much. We were trying to understand what it means because Maharaj, we all know, before he came to Krishna consciousness, he spent 2 years living in India and traveling all over India and living without any place. He was living on the banks of different rivers, visiting different ashrams, living in the forest. For him, austerity was normal. I remember we we were having popcorn and milk at night. No, we were having popperdams, and milk at night. And Maharaj came to New Vrindavan, and he thought, boy, that's opulent. That's sense gratification. We were thinking, we're just barely making it. He was saying, this is sense gratification, hot milk and poppers at night. So his eating was so austere. He was eating, and during the day, of course, we were very austere. We had rice with no ghee, no salt. We had no subjis. We had chapatis with no ghee. And we had something we called dal. It wasn't dal, it was pea beans. And you cook it, and when you eat that, if you eat too much, because right after lunch, we would read Krishna book. Isn't that amazing? Good time to read Krishna book right after lunch. And everyone was asleep. It was like that in New Vrindavan, even during the Bhagavatam class. Shruti Kirti mentioned it yesterday. How the devotees, we would sit for Bhagavatam class and everyone would fall asleep because there was no japa period. And if you wanted to chant your japa, you had to chant before Mangalarti. So Mangalarti was at 4:30 and devotees were getting up at 2 because Radhanath Maharaj was getting up at like 1. We were getting up at 2, 2:30. And if you got up at 3, you were in Maya. That was late. And if you got up at 3:30, he's not going to last much longer. He's finished. He's going to leave 3:30. That's late. And we would try to get as much rounds as we could before Mangalarti because there was no time during the day. Everyone had to do their service. Because that was the mood. The mood was service. Service. Build New Vrindavan. Prabhupada wanted to make New Vrindavan a place where people could come and experience Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada's desire was 7 temples on 7 hills in smaller, replicas of those original Goswami temples. That was Prabhupada's idea. And he wanted, of course, cows and so many things. We were very lack in developing those temples. And I remember a few years ago, maybe even longer than that, Radhanath Swami said, I always had that dream to build those 7 temples on those 7 hills in New Vrindavan, but we couldn't do it for whatever reason. Things shifted away from Prabhupada's instructions, and we started getting into doing things in order to make money. And it became a money-making program. And therefore, we were going out and selling paraphernalia and everything in order to bring in money so we could build. So the whole New Vrindavan scheme, as Prabhupada had visioned it, was put on a back burner at best. So when Maharaj was here, we were talking, he said, I'm going to do what I wanted to do here in New Vrindavan. So this was his vision, and he did it. That was many years ago when he first started this project. He wanted to make that scheme of 7 temples, and of course the Vrindavan, forest, Govardhan Hill, Jamuna, everything is here. So that was his vision, even in New Vrindavan. And he, and only him and Varsana Maharaj, the two, really tried to work at it in New Vrindavan, but it wasn't possible. The facilities weren't there. The direction of the community was completely different. And so it happened here. So wherever there is such a great soul, then Krishna manifests himself in his leelas in the form of the mood of Vrindavan. So we're actually, very fortunate to have such a pure devotee in our association. His vision is simply to spread Krishna consciousness in such a way as to make Vrindavan available to the entire world. And we're seeing it here. So, of course, there's many, many other wonderful activities that we performed. Some of them were quite hilarious. Some of them were quite crazy. Just like I think my sister came to see me. It was June 5th, 1973. She came, and that day we were attacked by a motorcycle gang. Do you remember that? And they came. Kirtananda Swami was giving class, Bhagavatam class. I was sitting in the class, we were there. And all of a sudden, while he was talking, a shotgun comes through the window, double barrel shotgun. One devotee sees it and he goes to grab the gun and the gun goes off. And it was buckshot. So it went all over the temple and it hit 4 devotees. So 4 devotees were quite wounded. One was severely wounded. Later on, he actually left the body. So then they came in and started to ransack the temple. We found out later that the motorcycle gang leader was looking for his daughter. Our kirtan program, or our Sankirtan program, came to a place called Louisville, Kentucky, which was about, a couple hours away. And they did some Sankirtan there, and one of the brahmacharis got friendly with the daughter of the leader of the motorcycle gang, and he invited her to New Vrindavan. And then she actually came. But she was up in the woman's ashram. And so they couldn't find her, and they were looking all over for their daughter. But he brought all of his men with him, and they were just like, they wanted to do some destruction, so they just destroyed the temple. And 4 devotees were killed. And 4 devotees were shot. One was later died because of the wound. That was a pretty harrowing experience. I remember later on, one girl from New Vrindavan, this was many years later, because we tried to prosecute those motorcycle gang, but it didn't work. We took them to court. We had 30 witnesses describing everything, and the judge said, insufficient evidence. He threw it out of court, and they all got away. Yes. There's a microphone there? Yeah.
There was one part about when they took Bhaktipad up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? And they were going to kill him?
Yeah, I'll get to that part. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the finale.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, Kirtananda Swami, his name was also, they also gave him the title Bhaktipad. So him and the leader of the the Sankirtan team, Dharmatma, and two of these motorcycle guys had guns, and they were walking up the hill, and they told them, "You're going to dig your grave, and then we're going to kill you." So they had guns pointed at them. They were forcing them to walk up the hill. I was in the temple, and I was telling the devotees, because I had been in Vietnam, so I had known a little bit of, what you do when you're in a war zone. So I told the devotees, stay low and chant the Shringadev prayers. We get down. So, because these guys had guns and they were breaking the altars, they were shooting, putting bullets in the ceiling and just screaming at us. And so the devotees started to chant, Namaste, Narasringhaya. And what happened is they were chanting loudly, and the motorcycle guys got really freaked out, and they got even more angry and started to yell and scream. And so I said, all right, cool it. Chant to yourself quietly. So then we found an opportunity to leave. So I was leaving through the Pujari room, and I was with a group of devotees. And as I was going out, the leader, the motorcycle gang leader, he came up to me with a knife and put it right at me and said, turn around. So he was calm. He wanted to get his daughter back. The rest of them were just wanted to make a mess. So we went back in. And then this is a very hard thing for me, for anybody to say. They told one devotee, I won't mention his name, to push over the deities. So they pushed over Krishna. Now, this was happening at the same time whether these two were Kirtananda Swami and Dharmatma were being led up the hill by gunpoint. And then he pushed over Srimati Radharani. That was it. When she hit the floor, something happened. Nobody can understand what happened. It's undescribable. All of the motorcycle guys immediately ran and left. They got completely freaked out. The two guys that were holding the guns, they just ran and everybody left the community. As soon as Radharani was pushed over, she saved everybody. Actually, she saved everybody. Of course, Kirtananda Swami came back and he chastised us. He said, you should have fought against those guys and never let that happen to the deities. He was chastising us. He said, you should have gave your life for those deities. And of course, we weren't. And so after that, of course, we had a program where we would guard the deities 24 hours a day. We're running out of time, huh? What is the time now? 9:15? Okay. So I'll end very quickly. But I'll just end that later on, one Sankirtan girl from New Vrindavan went to Louisville, Kentucky, where that gang was, and she saw one man in a wheelchair. She approached him, trying to sell him a book. When he saw who she was, he freaked out. And then he spoke to her. He said, I was one of the guys that came in and just helped to destroy your community. And because of that, I'm sitting in this wheelchair. He said, this is what your God did to me. So he connected it with the sin he did. So they got their reactions, obviously. So this was a situation, of course, that led, when Prabhupada heard the situation, he told one devotee whose name was Uddareta, he was a Green Beret Marine, he was very martial spirited, to come into New Vrindavan and to teach us how to fire guns. So now we were learning military arts in New Vrindavan. I just got out of the service about a year ago. And now I was thinking, oh God, I joined a Hare Krishnas to get back in the army again. So it was quite mortifying. But devotees were doing that, learning how to fight. We were marching and all this. And so Prabhupada's instruction was, you have to protect the deities, the devotees, the temples, everything. So this went on for quite a while. But back to the essence of this, that living in New Vrindavan and the austerities we performed were actually great opportunities for service. And this was communicated to us constantly, that devotional service means to sacrifice. Even Prabhupada, I was listening to Prabhupada yesterday, and he was talking about the same thing. And guess where he was giving the class? In New Vrindavan. In 1969, he's talking about that without austerity, there is no bhakti. Bhakti means austerity, because Prabhupada was saying, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no meat eating, no gambling. You have to use all of your energy to serve Krishna and try to please Krishna. These are austerities we have to perform, and this is what makes up Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada was really emphasizing it. So this is what Krishna consciousness means. And we know, in order to make temples, yatras, programs happen, it's austere. Devotees have to work hard. Devotees here can speak about when they do the yatra every year. We usually go to either Jagannath Puri, Vrindavan, or Mayapur. The devotees prepare that yatra for 10,000 devotees plus all of the other devotees that come extra all year round. They're working hard, developing, doing and planning everything for practically a year before the yatra. The sacrifice that Radhanath Swami performed in his own execution of devotional service, he is the example for, his devotees are an example for that same austerity. And that's what makes Krishna consciousness so wonderful. Devotees will do anything to serve the Lord, to reach Krishna consciousness. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also writes about that. He says, what is my happiness in my service to you, my dear Lord? He says, the difficulties I encounter in your devotional service. This is my pleasure. Then we can actually offer something to the Lord. We don't look for austerities, it comes. But we're happy because we understand this is an opportunity to do some service for the Lord, to make some sacrifice. The word sacrifice is a Latin word, comes from the Latin word sacrificio. Sacrificio means to make sacred. So sacrifice actually means to make something sacred or something holy, something divine, like that. So Radhanath Swami, of course, his knowledge of Shastra, his sacrifice to preach all around the world, traveling everywhere at the expense of his health, at the expense of, I know he would love to just take time to read Srimad Bhagavatam and preach, but he makes sacrifices in order to spread Krishna consciousness. He travels all over, going to places, meeting people. It's not easy to travel. And as time pushes on, we get older and becomes harder and harder to continue that type of lifestyle. But devotees, so he is an example of selfless service. And that's why I picked this verse, because because of his selfless service, everyone is dear to him and he is dear to everyone. That is a great personality. So we're very fortunate to have such a great personality in our, we might take it for granted that he's just the leader, but actually he's such a personality that is rare. To be in such a servant, to meet a personality like that is very, not rare, very, very, very rare. His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. New Vrindavan Dham ki. Governor Echo Village ki. Hare Krishna.